Dear friends, grace and peace to you this Easter morning from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. So 2 years before I was born in 1983. So 1981, the best song written in the history of the world came out. I don't know if you knew that. And it went a little something like this. It went, just a small town girl living in a lonely world. She took the midnight train going and... So you know the song, right? You got to know the chorus then, right? You know the chorus. It's don't stop believing. Your enthusiasm is impressive. Hang on to what? Hang on to that feeling. And so not to ruin the song, although maybe that did for you. Sorry if it did. But notice the connection it makes between believing something and feeling something. That those two things are essentially the same, at least in the song. So I've been a pastor for coming up on 13 years this summer. One thing I've noticed is this is an incredibly common view of faith. Even among some Christians, I would add to that in order to believe, you just got to hang on to the feeling, right? But especially, you don't pay attention to the evidence for faith. And in fact, you actually have to believe in spite of the evidence, is the assumption that a lot of people have made. See, because faith is based mostly on a feeling that we have. And don't get me wrong, I think genuine faith is not always void of feeling. That I wouldn't say that. And yet what I want to argue this morning is that our faith is not based on a feeling, but instead on a fact. And in particular, it's the fact that Jesus Christ really did rise from the dead. And that's not to say that we have some sort of proof for that, by the way. That's definitely not true. We don't have proof. And yet, nevertheless, there is, in fact, very good substantial evidence for the claim that Jesus, who really did die on a Roman cross 2,000 years ago, also really did rise from the dead 3 days later. In other words, Jesus is alive. Do you believe that? The question is, if so, why? You're hanging on to the feeling, right? That's what and if you don't believe it, also, why not? It's worth considering. And so what we're going to do this morning is I want to look at 3 different reasons to believe. 3 different reasons. That's probably not enough, I will admit. And if you want to do the original version of the sermon, which was 37 reasons to believe in the resurrection, we could spend Easter Sunday together. My definition of a good time would be fantastic. But maybe we'll just go with 3 instead. And the first is what I'm going to call the argument from creation, is what I'll call it. So 3 arguments. Let me touch on the first. Argument of creation. The first time I ever gave a message on Easter, I had this idea that what I was going to do is I was going to get up into the pulpit with a fish sandwich. And I was literally going to just eat that fish sandwich in front of everyone while you all looked on, presumably very confused, would be the whole goal of it. And the thing is, like most of my best ideas, I ran that idea by my wife. And also, like most of my best ideas, she threw it right back in my face. Like, that's a horrible idea, actually. If only because she thought it would just be weird. Like, what is the point of that? No one's going to get it. But you see, the point that I still stand by today, in fact, is that when Jesus rose from the dead, the scriptures are emphatic in saying that it was a bodily resurrection. You saw that in our reading. They get there, the body is not there in particular. And in fact, one of the big things that Jesus himself does to prove the point is in a particular instance with his disciples, they're out on the water fishing, he calls them into shore, and then they literally eat bread and fish together. Hence, fish sandwich. I still think it's a great idea. Maybe next year we'll do it. But you see, what that means is the Christian conviction, notice this, has never just been the immortality of the soul. That's not what we're celebrating today. Different cultures and religions have almost always believed that, including biblical Christianity, by the way. We see this specifically Christian hope that arose directly out of Easter. It was not the immortality of the soul, but instead the resurrection of the body. And here's why, specifically, because the resurrection of Jesus' body. That it wasn't just that he went on living in the disciples' hearts. It's like the Celine Dion form of resurrection from Titanic, right? Once more. I've got a lot of songs this morning. It's fun. But the heart goes on. That's not what it was. It wasn't that the heart goes on. Instead, I think it was Woody Allen who said this. He said, I don't want to go on living in your heart. I want to go on living in my apartment. Like, and the thing is, that is precisely the Christian hope that we have. It's the resurrection of the body, and that is the conviction regarding Jesus that we have. Not spiritual continuation, but a new creation. Is what the scriptures speak of, meaning in particular that someday there's going to be a whole new creation where death will be no more. And mourning and crying and pain will be no more. It's Revelation 21, if you're familiar with it. You see, what happened on Easter is Jesus became the first fruits of the new creation, is what it calls him, that all of us eventually are meant to enter into. And so here's the thing about that. That probably seems far less believable to many people than some sort of soul that leaves the body and somehow stays alive. Right? It seems way less believable. And yet what I would suggest is it is based on far stronger evidence. And in particular, when it comes to the claim that there will be a new or even a second creation, you could call it, maybe the strongest or most obvious evidence that that is possible is the fact that there is a first creation already. Did we not notice that? And so in other words, if it's happened before, why not again? And if you're thinking that this world has just always existed, it just kind of has been here forever, and so nothing new ever is going to come, that's actually not true. And in fact, starting in the 20th century, there's been universal agreement in the scientific community that the world we live in now had a beginning. And there are a few different hypotheses about how exactly it happened. Typically, what's called the Big Bang is the most plausible explanation. But however it happened, put that aside, what they are certain did happen is that something came out of what was in essence nothing. Meaning the world that you and I live in now, the whole space-time continuum, did not exist at a particular point. But then, all of a sudden, it did. And so you see what that means is this world has what is called an antecedent cause. Meaning essentially it is a created world that we live in with some sort of creating cause behind it. And just to be clear, that's not to say anything about who or what it is that created it, whether that antecedent cause is an intelligent being or a personal being that you can personally know. Not saying that yet. I'll make that claim a little. I'm a pastor. You know where I'm going to go with this, right? It's like I'm going to try to make that case. So that will come later. But just all I'm saying now, there was a cause that created this world. And in addition to being created, what the science shows on top of that is it is also fine-tuned. Not only contingent, you could say, but also calibrated. Meaning in particular, there seems to be an intent behind it. If only because the probability of some kind of random chaotic force, or chaotic occurrence that is, with no mind or intention, to create the very precise conditions to be conducive to what we call life. That it is an infinitesimally low probability that that would happen. And don't get me wrong, it could totally happen. Just like if you threw paint on the ceiling of your house a few billion times, it might recreate the Sistine Chapel. It could happen. It's incredibly low probability. The odds that this world would be here and the odds that you yourself would be in it are very low. Don't take that for granted. And yet, there you are. Hey, you're here. And human beings are even more complex and beautiful, I would suggest, than the Sistine Chapel. And what it seemed to suggest, at least, is there is at least the possibility that this antecedent cause of this universe is not a chaotic force, but an intelligent mind who has an intention or an aim, you could call that, or even a goal, you could call it, namely to create life. and perhaps also very specifically to create your life. That you're literally not a cosmic accident, but an intentional creation. And so are your kids and your parents and the people sitting around you. And I'm going beyond the material science now. I totally know that. So I'll just take a step back and just say, there is a creation, right? We know that. And it's fully possible, if not probable, based on the evidence, that this creation has an intelligent, powerful, and very intentional mind behind it. And if that's the case, why not again? Why can't he do it again? Create another world, that is, a new creation. That's the Christian conviction. That the very God who created this world on Easter created a new Big Bang, you could call it, that was localized specifically to a man named Jesus from a town called Nazareth. And what it did is it rolled away a stone. It brought order out of chaos, and it created life out of non-life, which all the science says is the very things that happened at the beginning, except for the whole stone part that wasn't there. But order out of chaos, life out of non-life. It's just the same thing happening again. And all that is to say, if there is an old creation, why not a new one? It's fully possible. So let's go from possible to perhaps probable is the next move I want to make. And this is not the argument from creation, but an argument from courage is what I'm going to call it. So I went to junior high at Sierra Vista over in Canyon Country, where all the good kids live. Canyon Country is the best side of town, by the way. It's fantastic. And in 7th grade, I still hold that view. Sorry, I know we're on the left side of town. But 7th grade one day, one of my friends was a teacher's assistant for our history class. And what happened is at a particular point, he got hold of the test that we were going to take the next week. And so this is pre-Christian Garrett, by the way, just to be clear, not on the trajectory at this point to become a pastor. But a total of 5 of us, what we did is we studied that test like crazy. And when it came to taking the test, every single one of us, literally every single one of us, got 100%. Didn't try to delay, didn't try to fake a few wrong answers. No, we just turned in our test right away with 100%. What eventually happened is our teacher, I think, began to catch on to us. And the way that we knew that he caught on to us is one day, at the beginning of class, he named all 5 of us and said, "You 5 stay after class." And then after everyone left, he put our tests right back in front of us and said, "You have one of 2 options right now. You can either admit the lie, that you cheated, you can admit that you cheated on this test, and you can take it again right now, no strings attached. Like, won't tell your parents, won't tell the principal, just admit it. Or you can continue to lie and you get an automatic F." So what do you think we did? I personally wanted to keep a united front. I was like, let's do it, right? Like, come on, we're smart kids, we got it. We're not lying, we're just amazing students. But what happened is one of our friends immediately cried, like, "Oh my goodness, don't tell my mom." I'm like, "Oh, thanks, dude." At which point it was over for the rest of us, right? It was over for the rest of us. And so we all took the test again. Pretty sure one of our friends still failed the test. None of us did great, but at least we weren't caught up in the lie anymore, and that was at least a little bit freeing. But that's the thing about a lie. You don't get an F for the sake of maintaining a lie, especially when someone offers you a second chance to just be honest and tell the truth. When the pressure is on, it's almost guaranteed that at least one person who's lying will crack. So after the first Easter Sunday, one of the things that happened, or one of the main things that happened, people that we usually call the apostles, it's this original 12 followers of Jesus who eventually get sent out, and they get sent out with this thing called the gospel, is what they're supposed to spread. Kind of the 2 main short form versions of the gospel. It was either Jesus is Lord, that's what they would say, like Jesus is Lord is what they would say, meaning essentially nothing else should be Lord. Especially of your own life in particular, just Jesus ruling and reigning is what it means to say Jesus is Lord. And that's because the second short form of the gospel was Christ is risen. That this Jesus we're saying you ought to give your life to, the reason you should do that is he died for you, but then 3 days later, we saw it with our own eyes, he's literally alive. was the message. That's the gospel. Jesus is Lord. Christ is risen. And so you see, everywhere they went, they brought this message of the gospel with them. And the thing is, as you may know, pretty much everyone loved the message. Yeah? These guys are amazing. Okay, no, that was not the response at all. They were hated by the world. And in particular, they were misunderstood and mocked by pretty much everyone. Some of them, their own families, disowned them and pushed them out. They were frequently put into prison. A lot of them get put on trial. And then ultimately, at the end of it, 11 of the 12 end up getting killed for the faith. All of which is to say, they faced an incredible amount of pressure to just admit to the fact that it was a lie. That Jesus didn't really rise from the dead. And if you could just admit that, you can just take the test over, so to speak. That's the offer. Meaning no repercussions, no consequences. You can just go to brunch and play with your friends. Maybe even get one of those 25-cent chocolate chip cookies that they sell at Sierra Vista. Like, they're probably $25 now. I don't know if that's like, but they're like the size of your face. Sorry. But no, just tell the truth is what they were told. And you can go. And what did they say? We are telling the truth. Do what you want. You can fail us. We don't care. You can flog us. We don't care. You can literally set us on fire. We don't care. One of the earliest martyrs did, in fact, get burned alive, as I'm talking about fire. And the thing is, when he was tied up above the fire, he turned to his executioner and said, "I'm done on this side. You should turn me over." Like, that guy was a little crazy. He's like, oh. No, actually, I would say they weren't crazy. You read the records of their lives, they were some of the sanest and saintliest people you could ever come across. They had just seen something, and they could not unsee it. And so again, 11 of the 12 apostles end up getting killed for their faith. The 12th was John, and John got exiled to the island of Patmos and wrote much of what we call the New Testament, the Gospel of John, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and the book of Revelation. But you would think altogether, if it was a lie, at least one of the 12 would have cracked. And then everything would have fallen from the get-go, and we wouldn't be here right now. But they didn't do that. Instead, what testifies to the veracity of their message, this Jesus is Lord, Christ is risen, what testifies to the veracity of that is the courage of those who first carried that message. You see, I think it's worth noticing that it's not like they were the bravest people in the world to begin with. And in fact, if you go through the Gospels, what you see is before Easter, they were terrified as a group. Terrified especially of human opinion, for instance. Jesus is on trial. Peter's like, I don't know the guy. I swear I don't know him. I don't think he said the part. I'm just adding in dramatic effect. But you get the point. They were also jockeying for social position pretty much all the time. Like, who's going to be the greatest? I'm going to be the greatest. No, I'm going to be the greatest. Like, they were doing that, and that they cared a lot about worldly position, which a lot of insecure, kind of cowardly people do. And the thing is, most telling of all, when Christ got crucified, every single one of them ran away. Or at the very least, just stood in the background and watched at a distance. You see, because before Easter, they were cowards. And yet the record of history shows that after Easter, they were not. All of their fear was gone, replaced by the faith that nothing in this world could hurt them. And in fact, that not even death itself was deadly anymore. So the movie Terminator 2, which I know it's an odd reference on Easter Sunday, just hang with me, Terminator 2. There's this character, if you've seen the movie, it's T-1000 is the guy's name. He's fantastic. He's one of the villains, but one thing about him is literally nothing can hurt him. He can like blow off part of his body, goes, comes right back. And you see, it's precisely because he knows that nothing can hurt him that he can walk towards anything with complete confidence and courage. And so what would it look like if you were convinced that nothing could hurt you? nothing can hurt you, that you had absolutely nothing to fear, or even ultimately nothing to worry about. How freeing would that be of us? And that's what it was for the apostles. It was freeing of them. They knew that if they just followed this Jesus, it would never end in death, only new life. And I would suggest that that is a substantial piece of evidence that it's true. That Jesus was definitely dead at one point, but then after Easter Sunday, he was definitely alive. And so those who trust in him have nothing to be afraid of, nothing to be worried about, and nothing to be intimidated by, which I think is pretty fun. And that's what the courage of the apostles testified to, that Christ is in fact risen, and in him you have nothing to fear. So creation testifies, courage testifies. I grew up in I came to faith in a Baptist church. Every sermon had 3 points, all of which were alliterative. You can probably see where this is going. So creation, courage, and the third piece of testimony I want to touch on is what I'm going to refer to as calling testifies. Calling. So my wife and I have 3 kids. We have Paul, who's 5. They're coming at 11. Paul, who is 5. Levi, who is 3. And Jack, who turns 2 this summer. And so 3 boys. And one thing I will say about raising 3 boys, it is all gas, no brakes in our house. It's a lot of fun. And the thing is, we love those kids, like with everything we've got. We absolutely adore them, which is good because they are probably currently shaving 10 to 15 years off our life expectancy. So, but nevertheless, I will say being a parent is a beautiful gift. And I think one of the more fascinating parts of being a parent is your relation to your kids' names. It's just like we don't even think about it, but your relation to your kid's name is fascinating. What I mean by that is, first of all, when they are born, you get to be the one to name your kid. They don't name themselves, you name them, which I don't know about you, but at least that felt to us like a little bit of pressure, if only because they grow up, that's going to be them. They're stuck with that name the rest of their lives. You think about your own name, that is you. Meaning it's essentially, in a lot of ways, it's your identity is your name. I am Garrett and not some other person. You are your name. You think of you are that person and not some other person. And so in a lot of ways, your name is you. It's you. I think about that I've noticed as our kids have gotten older is sometimes I'll find myself saying their names to them in some less than pleasant ways. And in particular, it goes kind of like this. It goes, Paul! Like, I'm just really mad. Like, Paul! Or Levi, like, did you poop your pants again, buddy? Like, we're in potty training right now. Sorry, it's like, oh my goodness. But totally disappointed, that voice of disappointment. Or Jack, what? Like just totally confused. Why would you climb up on top of the table that you just fell off of? Like, because he's 2 and nothing really makes sense in his world. But nevertheless, it's still Jack. What the heck? And so all that is to say, like a lot of parents, I will most likely be the cause of my kids being in therapy as they grow up. And like, the way he said my name, anyway, sorry. But no, in truth, giving someone a name or even just calling someone by their name, I'm making light of it, but in reality, it has this real power to it. Names do, both to give life to a person. That's part of why you name a child right as they're born. You're giving life and identity to that person. But then at the same time, you can use a name in a way that actually diminishes life or even denigrates, if not just denies their identity. It's a really powerful thing to call someone by their name. And so here's the thing. If you go all the way back to the book of Genesis, it's the beginning of the old creation that we live in now. And what happens is part of the dominion that God gives to Adam is that Adam is given the dominion to name things. That's actually part of what makes him like God, that he gets to name all these different things that God has made. And you see, kind of the peak of that experiment or exercise is he gets to name this particular woman that God makes for him. And you and I know her. It's Adam and... I thought it was Jennifer. Isn't it? No, a name matter. Adam and Eve, right? Adam and Eve. And the thing is, that name Eve, it's an identity marker. The Bible has this constant kind of theme that names are identity, meaning it literally, or Eve's name literally means mother of all living. And so it's telling us who she is and also what her purpose is. It's what a name functions as. And so essentially Adam's naming of Eve is part of what brings her into this life. And the thing is, it's beautiful. This power, that is, to say someone's name. It means you know them. It also means you love them. And to be known and loved is, according to Genesis, what you and I were made for. That's why we were naked and next to each other, and next to God as well, and naked before him. It's meant to convey known and loved is what you're made for. And in fact, not even just Genesis, but modern psychology says this very thing, that to be known and loved is the most basic need of the human psyche. That's why to be lonely and alone feels like the biggest curse. But it's a name that gives us life, right? In the sense of the Greek word for life is zoe, which is the word for life that means you're really alive. It's different from the Greek word bios, which just means you're existing. You see, to be known and loved gives us that zoe kind of life. And yet here's the issue. If you were with us on Good Friday, we got into this a little bit. But just a little bit later in Genesis, Eve does something that is not exactly great. It's the whole follow the entire creation sort of thing, minor discretion or minor indiscretion. Who might have judged, right? But no, what's notable, what Adam says, when he is confronted with the fact that the person he knows and loves falls from what she is expected to be, it's when God asks Adam what happened. Notice Adam's word choice in response. He says, this woman. He gave her name. He won't even say it. It's just this woman. Right? He says it in a way that it's really meant to downgrade, if not deny, her value. Have you ever had someone who refuses to say your name? Or they say it in a way that clearly is meant to diminish your life? This woman is what that is. And what that's conveying is, I don't like you. I don't love you. And maybe the biggest thing is, I don't even know you right now. Nor do I care to. And all of a sudden, the power to name someone that God himself gave to us, and thereby to name them, but also to give them life by naming them, is now used to diminish that life. And you can just tell, Eve begins to die in that moment, in the Zoe sense of the word. So it's part of why we read in Proverbs, it says this, it says, death and life are in the power of the tongue. You think about all the things that we use our tongues for, but death and life are in the power of the tongue. That you and I, although we were made to be known and loved in this world that we live in now, this old creation that is, part of the human experience is we can't fully get that anymore. And that's even if you have like a great marriage or a fantastic family or even the best and most beautiful friendships you could imagine. Still, those can only give you shadows and approximations of what we were really made for. And there is an ache of loneliness in the human heart that everyone has picked up on for eons. And I don't want this to sound like an exaggeration, but the biblical view is that is a death for us compared to what our life was supposed to be. And a lot of people are, in fact, in therapy for the very things that this old creation will never give to us. And yet the reason I'm bringing this up, that's the old creation. You go to our readings from today about the resurrection of Christ. The very first person to encounter the risen Christ was a particular person named Mary Magdalene, was her name. There's been a lot of debate about the exact history of her life. For a while, the typical understanding was that she was a prostitute at one point in her life. That's questionable. We don't really know that for sure. And yet one thing we do know about Mary Magdalene is her name did not represent good things. And in fact, her identity was one that people would rather not know. And the thing is, that's exactly what was so crushing to Mary Magdalene when Jesus Christ died. That's why she's the first at the tomb, right? And just stays there weeping. It was that he, unlike anyone else in this world, actually saw her. Not with eyes of judgment, which is always blinding of true vision. Someone who's incredibly harsh in their view of people can never truly see people. but with eyes of grace is how he saw her. Eyes, that is, that could blot out the sin and the shame that was in her and bring out instead the original beauty and goodness with which God had first created her. But all that had been lost, she thought, on the cross. And what she didn't yet know is the cross was precisely the place from which that grace came. And yet she didn't realize that at first, much less did she have any hope beyond the grave. All she knew was this old creation. And so she's just weeping at the tomb, and what happens, and this is in the Gospel of John in particular, if you want to read it later today, but the risen Christ comes up to her, and it's notable that even though she is seeing the risen Christ, like literally standing right in front of her, she doesn't believe it. It's not seeing that makes you believe. If I saw the risen Jesus alive today, I would believe in Easter, right? This actually suggests, no, we wouldn't. But instead for Mary, she believes it when Jesus says, notice some of the very first words that come out of the mouth of the risen Jesus Christ. Mary. It's a name. Mary. He calls her by name. And you see what happens is the very God who created what we call the old creation with the words of his mouth is how he created. Let there be light. And something beautiful came out of that nothing. Now all of a sudden, that same God starts creating a new creation by calling people by name. Mary, he says. Matt. Rick. Reagan. You guys are hoping you don't get called on, right? It's like class, and you're like, oh my goodness, don't call on me, this is awkward. No, he calls people by name. So the 1500s, Reformed theologians coined the term, they called it effectual calling, is what they called it, effectual calling. What they meant by that is Christ calling you by name, not in your imagination, not having your pastor doing like, oh, let's imagine Jesus called our name, but actually Jesus himself doing it is what effectual calling is, or that's his calling. And when it's really him, it's effectual, is what they said. Meaning it regenerates the heart. It brings life out of death. And it makes someone who is a nobody into someone who is a somebody. A person with a name, that is, whom God himself knows and loves. And as we know, names really matter, right? Names matter. It's your identity, it's your life, it's Zoe, right? It's who you are and also who you are meant to be is what your name is. And that's the thing. Jesus Christ calls his people by name. It's what he himself says earlier in John. My sheep hear my voice, and I call them by name. The thing is, it's when he calls your name that you yourself know. You know yourself to be, that is, truly known and fully loved. And that's how you know that this whole resurrection of Jesus thing is not a lie. You've heard his voice. And this is what I'm saying is the third reason to believe it, calling. And this particular one, I will admit, is not objective evidence. I know that. It's subjective evidence. And whereas a lot of people will discount that sort of thing as not, it doesn't hold up in the court of law, right? It's not, quote, scientific. The truth is some things can only be known from the inside, and we know that, especially when it comes to a relationship. A cold scientist who has never fallen in love himself might study a marriage and look at the facts and say, it's really just pheromones, symmetry, and sexual attraction. And the thing is, Buddy's just a dork. Sorry, he needs to get a life. And that's the thing about not knowing the love of Christ and concluding that all the saints and sages were duped into believing a lie, that they heard a voice of a non-existent person. That's a dorky read of the data. And so I don't think it's an accident that the way Christ finishes a lot of what he says in the Gospels isn't think about this and figure it out. That has its place in the Christian faith, don't get me wrong, but that's not how he finishes his teaching. Instead, he says, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. Hear what? One might ask. The creation that you and I live in testifies to the fact that it was created. The courage that the apostles had testifies to the fact that Jesus was raised. But then ultimately, the calling of Christ himself testifies to the fact that he really is alive, that he knows you, that he loves you, and that he wants to lead you home. Will you follow? A new creation is where we're headed. It's what the first Easter inaugurated. Not death, but resurrection is your destiny. And so he who has ears to hear, let him hear. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for the gift of Jesus Christ, who is himself our new creation, the one in whom we find new life. So soften the hardness of our hearts, I pray. There's so many doubts that we have, not all of which are invalid, a lot of which is actually just from the world that we live in. But instead, help the voice of Jesus to cut through, to give us eyes to see all the evidence that surrounds us, that points ultimately to the voice of the one who loves us, even Jesus. It's in his name that we pray, and all God's people said, Amen.